Chris with Coilbreak here with another customer question. She asks, we have questions about carbonated beverages other than beer. They're trying to pour carbonated water, and we've had no luck getting the water to bubble. Their hope is to avoid buying club soda or sparkling water and use the tap for building energy drinks. They also had lemonade hooked up when they first installed the manifold with a leak. We had one of the manifolds that they had purchased from us had a small leak in the check valve, so we just sent them a new check valve, and she had to fix that. But and it was carbonated. I just plugged the leaking valve with my thumb while I was testing the lemonade pour. Obviously, I had to shut everything down since that valve was bad, but now that we have the new one installed, it's also flat. I have on the taps root beer, which is carbonating fine, water not carbonating, lemonade not carbonating, and then their fourth valve is off, but they want soda water on it. Help, they're opening their mobile bar trailer on Wednesday and sort of stuck with what to do. Okay, so let's briefly go over carbonation. Okay, that's where we're going to start. Let's start with the basics here. Let's start with the assumption that you are using a kegged beverage that is already carbonated. Okay, so you buy a keg of beer or you fill a keg with already made soda, right? This picture has a full-size 15.5 gallon keg in it. It doesn't matter though, right? This could be a 15.5 gallon keg. This could be a 2 gallon keg, a sixth barrel, a quarter barrel. It doesn't matter what this is. This is all going to operate the exact same way. Okay. So you get a keg that is already carbonated. Now, that carbonation level was already predetermined by whoever you bought it from. If it's soda, it's going to have a little bit higher carbonation to it. If it's beer, it's probably going to be anywhere from 2.4 to 2.6 volumes of CO2 with this per keg, depending on what brewery you're buying it from and the style of beer that you're buying. The goal when you're hooking this system up to a balanced draft system, which would be like in a bar or brewery, would be that when they tap this, their system maintains the proper carbonation level. So no matter how long this sits tapped, that this keg of beer stays at that CO2 level. That PSI is typically like anywhere from 10 to 12 PSI, and bars and breweries have precise control over how much pressure is going on here for each individual keg that they're tapping. That is a balanced draft system. They hook it up and they can go to their tap in their bar brewery and they spend a week or however long they need to empty that keg. When you're running a mobile draft system like a Jockey box or jumper box, that is not the case. We are using CO2 as brute force in order to get this liquid out through the spear, through the 50 feet of coil and out the faucet. In order to do that, we have to increase this pressure from the CO2 tank to 25 to 30 PSI for a 50-foot coil that's inside here, right? There's all this resistance that this liquid is going through, and we have to overcome that resistance by just brute force. And so what we do is this regulator pushes this top of the keg here to 25 to 30 PSI, and it pushes down on the keg in order for that liquid to come out and through the system. When we do that, we risk the chance of overcarbonation because any cold liquid will want to absorb the CO2 here. So if we increase this from 12 PSI to 25 to 30 PSI, this liquid will want to absorb this CO2. And if we leave this keg at 25 PSI, as this liquid starts to absorb the CO2, it will start to become overcarbonated. So let's say you go to an event, like let's say you're doing a wedding. You go to an event and you do the Friday night, the dinner party, right? And you tap your system, you tap your kegs, and you run it through a Jockey box. And then at the end of the night, you uncouple your keg, you set the beer aside, and you say, well, I'm gonna pour that tomorrow. If you leave that keg at 25 PSI and you don't relieve the pressure that's on the head of this keg, that 25 pounds of pressure, your liquid will start to absorb that, right? And then a day later, when you go to tap it at the wedding, you're now overcarbonated, right? And you're going to get nothing but foam from a Jockey box because your keg's been sitting at 25 pounds of pressure and your beer that you bought is now overcarbonated, right? So with a temporary draft system, you kind of like it's a time limit, right? You've got half a day to a day before your liquid starts to become overcarbonated. And the longer your coil's in a jockey box, the higher the pressure that you need in order to get through that coil. So a 50-foot coil is like that kind of that balance, that sweet spot of it's long enough to chill the beer, but it's not too long where you need all kinds of pressure in order to get it through the system. Okay, that's pouring an already carbonated beverage. Now she's asking about how do I carbonate a beverage, right? They want to fill this with water, then they want CO2 to absorb into this liquid, and then they want to pour this water that's now sparkling water. Now you can do that, right? Temperature is your issue here. A warm keg, let's say you fill this with water and you put all kinds of pressure on here and you want that CO2 to absorb into the water. Warm water does not like to absorb CO2. So the colder you can make this, the faster your CO2 will absorb into the water. So keep this on ice, right? High pressure doesn't, at this point, if you're not hooked up to a jockey box, it doesn't really matter what pressure is here, right? You can crank this to 40. Your relief valves on your coupler will pop at like 52. The back of the regulator has a relief, like a kind of a safety valve on it that will pop at like 52 or 54 pounds of PSI. So you can't really go above like 50 pounds of pressure, but you can add all kinds of pressure to the top of your keg here. And the more pressure you put here, the faster your CO2 is going to absorb into the liquid. So you want high pressure and cold water or cold beverage, right? So let's say you're trying to carbonate lemonade. Same thing, right? Fill this with lemonade, high pressure, make the keg cold, put it into a refrigerator, throw it on some ice. Okay, the colder this liquid, the faster it's going to absorb, right? So when home brewers are trying to carbonate their beer in a keg, what they can do is just same thing. Add a bunch of pressure to the top of the keg, throw it in the refrigerator, and then they can also you can also oscillate it, right? Move the beverage around, and as the sloshes around in there, it's going to start to absorb the CO2 in there as well. So that's another way to kind of like speed up the process of carbonation. But 24 to 48 hours, you're not going to have precise control over how much carbonation is in here. And you can go overboard where it's just nothing but carbonation comes out, where it's just nothing really bubbly like a high carbonated soda. So that you run the risk there too. So just, after a day, hook it up and pour it and see how you like the carbonation level. You can go up, right? And if you need to go down, unhook your system, get all the CO2 out of here that you can by pulling the relief valve on the coupler and shutting off your CO2. And then again, shaking the keg, right? That will release some of that CO2. And you can kind of adjust the CO2 pressure, whether you're adding pressure or removing pressure and oscillating the keg a little bit. You can do that too. But so 2 ways: carbonating beverages or just using it to get through the system. So that's how we use CO2 in a temporary draft system. Any more questions, fire them off. Chris at Cold Break USA is my direct email. Otherwise, support@coldbreakusa.com.